the Nancy Stevens Arts and Style Show, where you can expect to be entertained, amused and excited by my amazing guests, anyone who is anyone in the arts and entertainment world. And I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Eccentric, who is a published songwriter, poet, playwright and novelist.
Hey, hello.
Thank you for coming on my show.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And we are socially distanced. Yes, we are 2 meters apart. So crazy times we're living in, but you are a crazy kind of person anyway. So this is going to go back to the beginning, which is a very good place to start. Paul Eccentric, this ridiculous moniker you've had for more years than you care to remember. Where did this come from then?
Well, it wasn't me. It would be a bit of a smug thing to do, to call yourself something like that. And I've often thought about that over the years. People think, oh, he's given himself a bit of a smug name there, hasn't he? He's obviously...
But you're an artiste, you know, artists.
But no, I didn't come up with it. It wasn't mine. I got interviewed for the Watford Observer in, I think it was about 1984, maybe 1985, something like that. And as journalists do, they like to put your first name and your surname, and then they put your age. They stop short of putting a weight underneath it, thankfully. But I didn't want to give that. I hadn't thought it through at that point. I hadn't thought, who am I going to be? This was the first interview I'd ever done, and they wanted a full name, and I thought, oh, I'm not ready for this. I don't want to have a surname. I want to be like one of these artists that's just known by their first name. But Paul is a little bit of a common name. I'm afraid
no offence to all the Pauls out there. So Paul is a lovely biblical name, but it is quite common.
It was of its time, you know.
Absolutely.
Today, you know, if I was trying to start out now in 2020 and I was using the name Paul, people would think they'd never heard of it before, because it's not a name that you give now.
No.
But in the 60s and 70s, that was every other name. So I just refused. I will just be Paul. And when the paper came out, I noticed that they'd given me a surname, and they'd given me Eccentric, simply because the band I was being interviewed about was the Odd Eccentric, and so they just did, in the same way that Adamant, you know, is in Adam and the Ants, and suddenly he's Adamant, and that was a thing at the time. There was a lot of that at the time, so that's what I became, and I was stuck with it.
Not very exciting, is it?
No. So I got lumbered with it, really, but I followed it through. I might as well. And you can't change it now. I mean, there was talk when this particular book deal was being signed about whether that name was going to be distracting on the cover.
Distracting how, though?
I don't know. It was just something that was mentioned. And, well, yeah, I can stop and give myself a different name, but it's going to mean anybody that's bought any books before, or records, or
makes no sense whatsoever.
CDs or whatever, is not going to know who it is. So it really does need to stay. So it's one of those things I'm stuck with.
Well, you've not done too badly with that. You know, 7 books under your belt now.
This will be number 7.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, under Paul Eccentric. So talking about obviously writing, you have been quite sort of vocal in the fact that you really struggled at school and you're dyslexic. But in those days, dyslexia wasn't diagnosed, you were just labelled as stupid or thick or slow.
Thick boy,
and put to the back of the class. Is this your kind of kickback and sort of saying, well, you know, obviously I'm really struggling, this is all a bit of a blow, but I've got the stuff I want to get done no matter what order it comes out in? Was that kind of where that came from?
I knew I wanted to write, that was the thing. I wanted to write, and I was going to write, and being told you can't write because you're thick, and you can't spell your name, even though there's only 4 letters in it. That was difficult. But one of the things about dyslexia is dyslexics tend to be on the stubborn side. They don't just sit there and take it. If you can't do something that everybody else seems to be able to do really easily, you have to find your own way of doing things. And when I was actually diagnosed with being dyslexic, I was in my 40s.
That's quite late, though.
Very late, yeah. I'd always just gone along with the mantra, I am thick, because that's what they told me I was. When they told me I was, that the lady that did the tests on me, she said, if there was no such thing as dyslexia, if there weren't dyslexics in the world, the human race would stagnate, because everybody doing everything the same way, it's never going anywhere.
Pretty boring anyway.
Yeah. And people tend to, unless you have something like a war or some huge world event like that, which makes people look outside of the box and and try and find new ways of doing things. If you don't have that sort of thing, everybody just follows the pattern that's laid out. But the dyslexic can't do that. The dyslexic has to find a way around it, and sometimes the way around it can be better than the original way, and other people then adopt that as the norm. So I thought that was quite interesting because it made me feel that I wasn't a stupid person. I was just finding my own way, and I can spell my name now.
Well, that's progress indeed, and you know, so
I just have to look at the book covers because now they print it on the front, you see, and I can look at that and I can say, that's how it's done.
P-A-U-L.
Yeah, not the P-U. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So obviously the poetry, the songwriting, the playwright, and the novels. What came first? Did you
came
write?
first? It was. It's a toss-up really between it being music or playwriting. I say a toss-up, I mean it should be obvious which was first, but the first couple of plays I wrote weren't particularly good. They're not things that I would like to hold up now and say, let's give that a reread. But that's where it started. I was in a youth group at a church, and all we did was things like going ice skating and going bowling and going swimming and things like that, as youth groups do. And I decided I wanted to do something else.
But what happened to youth groups?
I don't know. Do they not still?
No, they don't. And I think that has signalled the end of, you know, the way society was as we were growing up. Here we had that we did something every weekend, and we knew everybody joined up, you know, just joined and had fun, and it was a lovely thing to do. And kids today, I know I'm sounding like my mother now, just hanging around street corners are bugger all to do because they don't have that.
They should get back to youth clubs because that stopped you robbing shops. That's what I always got told.
Absolutely.
Gave you something constructive to do.
Yeah.
And the trouble was we weren't really doing anything particularly constructive. So I set up this drama group within the youth group. And people seemed keen to give that a go, but it meant that somebody had to push it. So somebody had to write the stuff, and somebody then had to direct it, and then somebody had to be in it, and that ended up being me. And I hadn't intended to do that. I was happy just to sit at the back and sort of direct with a little d, you know, and write the stuff. But I ended up doing it all. So that's where I started performing. And I did a couple of those plays, and the third one was going to be a musical, pushing our luck a little bit.
That's quite ambitious.
It was a little bit, and I wrote some of the songs for that, and I formed a small band that was going to be it. The show never got put on. There were various things
artistic
in it.
Differences, maybe?
It wasn't so much artistic differences as it was religious differences. We were performing in a church hall, and the elder that had been assigned to me to make sure I did things within the rules of the church hall, he and I didn't really get on. And so it never happened. It was all right, it didn't happen. But I kept the band together that we'd formed for it. Right. So really, I see that being my start there, because that band, it was just a bunch of friends at the time, none of us knowing how to play anything or do anything properly.
It's never stopped anybody, never stopped status quo.
But that was punk.
3 chords, you know.
So off we pushed with that, and everything has then gone from there. But I don't usually talk about that bit at the beginning because I don't usually think about it. It all started with the band. It didn't. It came from the plays. And I then came back to doing plays later on. I did a show for the Edinburgh Festival, and I did 2 musicals. I eventually did get to do the musicals and do them properly.
And how was that?
It was a lot of effort, a lot of time spent. I learnt a hell of a lot from it. And prior to that, I was quite a nervous performer. But I directed these 2 musicals, and then I've never been nervous since. Because it just really beat it out of me. So I did that. And from the music came poetry, because, you know, if you're in a band, anybody else listening or watching who is in a band will know this. If you are the front person and who writes the stuff and is used to sitting in the car park waiting for the band to show up, and the sound man's going, well, look, you know, if you're not here in another few minutes, there won't be a sound check. And after years of doing that, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to take the choruses out and I'll just get up there and do it as poetry. So I did, which is cheating, but I quite enjoyed doing that. So I started to write poetry rather than songs. So everything just goes one to the next. Writing is writing, isn't it?
But no plan. It was just
no. There was never a plan.
Okay.
But there were various things I wanted to do, and I ticked off virtually everything I wanted to do. Now I'm just trying to do all the things again, only bigger. That's the nearest I've got to a plan at the moment.
And the crazy times that we're living in obviously has hampered the situation, obviously with the book launch now, festivals and all that sort of thing. But we'll come back to that, because I don't wish to sort of dwell on the negative, and you are making it work in some way, shape or form, because we've all, as creators, we've all had to be incredibly adaptable in this in this situation, haven't we? Doing things online. I mean, this is my first kind of live interview in 6 months, and I can't tell you how happy I am to be sitting opposite the person I'm interviewing rather than doing it on Zoom. And I love, don't get me wrong, I love doing interviews on Zoom, and it's worked really, really well. And obviously during lockdown, I'd ring up various people and they couldn't say no, because nobody was going anywhere. They couldn't say, sorry darling, you need to get back to, I'm on tour. Couldn't do that. So, but this is just so lovely. There's nothing like it. Yes.
Yeah, because the trouble with the Zoom thing, because I've done a few of those, I don't understand any of that stuff. I don't particularly like it. But as you say, it was needs must. You had to do those sort of things. And the trouble with that is, apart from the fact that the signal goes and people's faces freeze for a moment, and you're not sure whether they've actually died on you or
you're not
something.
in sync, or you get an Amazon delivery. That happens a lot.
But the bit that really gets me, we're chatting in the same room and you talk over each other a little bit. That's just how it is, and that's
a natural conversation. Absolutely,
yeah. And you don't get that with Zoom, because you've got to stop, and then somebody else does their bit of talking. And I find that the way my mind works, I've forgotten what I was saying by the time I've waited for somebody else to finish talking.
Absolutely, and also Zoom is the most unflattering thing as well.
It's horrible, isn't it?
Make sure we've got no chins, absolutely. Make sure we're sitting like this. Yes, absolutely. So yes, it's much better. So going back to the beginning. 2009, along with Ian Newman and Donna, your gorgeous wife, who's your PR agent as well, and
muse.
And muse, she is your muse, absolutely. How does that make you feel, being a muse, Donna?
Yo.
I'd love to be someone's muse. I just think that's so romantic. So Edinburgh Fringe, Sorry People, and then you obviously say you formed Rhythmical Rantings and Rants.
Rhythmical ravings and rants.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. So that's very alliterative. I mean, how did this all come about, and how did you meet Ian Newman, the force that is Ian Newman?
Back to the musicals I was doing. One of the things that I decided as a director might be a good way of bringing the cast together, because it was a huge cast. They didn't all know each other. Lots of singers, some of which were actors who could sing, some of which were singers who could act, a bit of both. I decided to gather them all together and make them go and do an open mic in a pub. Just really not having any rehearsal, just to gel, just to get on, because they'd have time sitting there chatting together with people they didn't really know, and they'd have to get up and try and find their way on a song that they possibly didn't know. And so we chose the Stabbing Pub in High Wycombe. So cool because...
Sorry, I have to interject. I'm assuming it's not called the Stabbing Pub.
No, it's not on the sign. No, it's not on the sign. It should be on the sign, because that's what people know it by. People get stabbed there, or got stabbed there.
Lovely.
I think it's a restaurant now.
Okay.
But it was called the Flint Cottage, but known as the Stabbing Pub. Anyway, so we went there because it was rough, and so we're going to put these middle-class singers in a rough pub and see what happens. And whilst there was this bloke. If you've been to open mics, or anybody knows open mics, there's always a guitarist with far too many foot pedals, most of which he doesn't know what they do, and he spends his entire time setting them up. And then they say, right, that's your time gone. It's gone. He's not played a note. There's always somebody there who thinks he's a drummer. He's never touched a drum kit in his life. But this was the first time I'd been into an open mic, and there's a bloke there sitting there with his bass guitar on his lap. And whoever gets up on the stage, he says, "Do you want bass on that, mate? I think you need bass on that." That was Ian. So I met him at the bar, and he's not known as the bass whore for nothing. That's where it came from. And so we used him. We got to know him. Found out he could sing a bit as well, and he ended up being one of the singers when somebody dropped out. Got to know him through that, and then after the musicals, I'd made some friends at this open mic, so I carried on going back there now and then, just for a laugh. I decided I would be that percussionist that was irritating and would join him whether people wanted or not. So I was there with my washboard and my kazoo, he was there with his bass guitar, and we just irritated the hell out of everybody that came in. And the lady who ran this open mic, she let it slip one night that she really, really hated poets.
I know where the story is going as well.
So I decided the following week I was going to turn up with my floppy hat and my big shirt, and I was going to do poetry until she stopped me. And because it annoyed her, I did it again and again. And anybody else that came in said, "Oh, I've heard they do poetry at this open mic." "Yeah, mate, they do. Yeah, put your name down now." Anyway, so I was doing that, and week after week I was writing new stuff, and I really got into the flow and thought, "Oh, this is where I'm going to go next. I'm going to go back to poetry." And I found, because I was writing a lot, it was all having the same sort of meter and the same rhythm, the same rhyme. And I couldn't get that out of my head. I felt I was writing the same piece week after week. And I was there one week, and there's this bloke called over from the bar. Do you want bass on that, mate?" And I thought, you know what?
Actually,
I do.
I actually do.
So after that evening, I said to him, "Look, could you possibly write some little bass riffs for me? You know, just a couple of bars, repetitive stuff, different time signatures, different key, different everything, and then I can put that in my head whilst I'm writing stuff, and I'll write to that, and then when I get up next month, I'll have a completely varied set." Trouble is, getting back to the dyslexia, my memory is appalling, and so when I got up there I couldn't remember any of the damn bass lines, and I just couldn't see how the stuff was going to work. So there's a call from the bar. "Do you want bass on that, mate?" "Yeah, please." So up he got, and he started playing bass behind these pieces, and suddenly everybody liked what I was doing, and everybody was going with it. And I thought, this sounds great. This really sounds great, that we could make a go of this, but it looks awful. So I said, "Could you go away and buy a double bass? Because it'll have a much better silhouette, you know."
I can't believe you asked him to go and buy a double bass.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty...
Because I thought, you know, if you can play it there, you can play it there.
That's pretty audacious, I think, to ask someone to do that.
I didn't work. He did it. He went away.
I'm sure he didn't need much persuading, actually.
He didn't need any persuading.
No.
Somebody letting him play bass on something. Yeah, I'll be there. I'll do that.
Monstrous great, yeah. Absolutely.
So he went away and he learned to play it, and it was just fantastic. It looked a lot better. It looked much better to have that, and then
it's such a focal point, and I mean it's such a beast of an instrument. I mean, to me, it is the sexiest instrument. I mean, the whole when they start, slapping a double. I mean, to me, it gets you in the solar plexus. It's really
the best
sexy.
noise. I really love it.
Noise, yeah.
But there was another thing it did. It helped us out no end when we started, because we would turn up initially to do open mics because we were trying to build up our show, build up a set, and you can't go out when you've only got half a dozen pieces. So we were building it up by doing the open mics, and everybody else is coming in with a guitar on the back or something, and we're trying to struggle through the doors of the pub with a damn great double bass, and it would get clunked on the side of the door, and then it would resonate when you put it down on the floor, and people think, "Oh wow, this is good, what's going to go on here?" And it took so long to get it in and out and set up, and people would say, "Have you had to carry that far?" And of course, if anybody who knows pubs and open mics, they're either in the basement or they're up in the attic. So yeah, you've got to get it up a tiny staircase, and you make it a noise as you go up. And so people would say, "Oh, as soon as you bought that, do you want an extra, 10-minute set?" And that was really helpful.
So that was your cunning. That was a cunning ploy, though, wasn't it?
I didn't think that one out. It just happened,
and it worked.
And it did work,
Yeah.
and it was great. And people just liked the fact that here's something different. These people are not going to just get up and do Queen covers. They're going to do something else, and it involves an instrument we don't normally see. So that's how the Antipoet came about, and we're now, I think, crikey, about 11, coming into 12 years in doing that, and we've played everywhere. We've done 7 Glastonburys on the trot, and numerous other festivals around the country. We've done, I think it's 7 CDs, so we've got a very big set now. And going back again to something I said before about why I started doing poetry in the first place, was because I was getting fed up with waiting for band members and them leaving at the last minute and not turning up on time and taking ages to set up. And I thought, let's cut this down. If it's just me that turns up, that's the way to do it. And that came about because the band I was playing in were supporting John Hegley, poet, fantastic poet, the best, I would say. And I saw him turn up and just get up there with his ukulele and do his set and get down. And that's brilliant. It's exactly what we're doing, only without the faff. So that's what I did. I cut it right down, and then I found we were going back up again. But the great thing with doing the Antipoet, which is more than just poetry.
Yeah, explain what the Antipoet is, because
people probably don't know.
No, they don't. No, and one can never assume that the Antipoet is anything like you've ever heard before, because it really, really isn't. I mean, extraordinary genius, and the chemistry between you guys is it's just unbelievable. And I think that's what works so well. Is the chemistry.
It's beat poetry. It's the thing. It's beat poetry. So there's a double bass, sets up the rhythm, and then the words come in over the top. Some people would call that rap if they were really stupid, but it's not. It's beat poetry at its essence. And we started doing that as sort of really political, really serious stuff, because that's what I was writing at the time. Quite angry poetry. And then after about 6 months, I threw in a comedy piece. I don't know why, I'd never written comedy before. Just thought, this might be funny. People aren't going to be expecting this. And now we do mostly comedy.
Comedy is really hard to write, though. I mean, did you know?
Don't find it so. Actually.
No, well, obviously you do it so well. But did you know you had funny bones? Because comedy is not for everybody, and it's not for the faint-hearted.
I've always been very much a cynic, and so I start doing something serious and angry, and something makes me laugh, and that gets in there. So there's always a sort of a dark humour to it. And a lot of the stuff I've written has been quite darkly humorous, but that's very different from trying to do something that makes people actually laugh, making them smirk and something while they're turning a page. It's fair enough, but trying to make them laugh out loud so that it is in essence a comedy gig, and you get more work that way. That it's tricky, but it just evolved for us as the entire act had evolved. It just went from being serious to comedy to being completely comedy. We still put the odd, usually 1 or 2 serious ones on each album, and they're ones that we probably won't play live because the audience want what they want, and so we play to the audience that we want. And the great thing with doing this particular thing, doing beat poetry, because it's just the two of us, people think sometimes they book us as a band, sometimes they book it as poetry, sometimes we get booked as a comedy act, sometimes we get booked as what's that word they use these days for? It's lots of letters put together.
Cabaret.
Yeah. No, there's another word for it, isn't there? Sort of the burlesque sort of thing. Anyway, we get booked for that. We get booked for burlesque as well.
Oh, I know. Because, I know what you mean. I'm trying to think now. It's quite that sort of, as you say, sort of burlesque vintage type.
Yeah. So we get booked for all sorts of different things with it, and it's the same act. No matter what they book us for, we do the same thing.
But that does fit in that genre, though, doesn't it? I think
it seems to. But because there's only 2 of us, rehearsals are a lot easier. It's so much easier at a gig with just 2 people having to turn up than having sort of 8 or 10.
Yeah.
And trying to write new material, because I'm not one of these people who can stick with the same set for very long. I get bored very, very quickly, and I want to put something new in the set. And with a band, it takes ages to try and get everybody to come in and work their parts out, to rehearse their parts, and be ready to and confident enough to do it at a gig. Whereas Ian and I can do it in an afternoon, because he really is that simple. There's nothing
He's
to
that
it.
simple, or it is that
It
simple?
It is that simple.
Okay.
I didn't say he was simple.
Okay, just clarifying.
No. He's dyslexic as well. He's dyslexic in different ways to me.
That's amazing.
I think that's partly why the thing works.
Yeah.
But another thing, when I started off with the bands as coming out of the musical, it was just a bunch of friends who couldn't really play very well, as I said. Soon found out that playing with friends like that, it's never going to work. Ultimately, there's too much pressure on the friendship to make that work.
Absolutely.
And the great thing with Ian and I is we are not what you'd call classic mates. We don't see each other outside of doing the Antipoet, or very, very rarely.
I thought you lived in the same house together.
No,
I'm so gutted.
We don't really socialise very often. I mean, it's not a down thing. I think that's a positive in the act,
absolutely.
because we're very, very different people, and we have very different views on things and different likes and dislikes. It works when we come together to do the act. Weirdly, it just works, and we can bicker away without getting too upset about it.
I think it's probably because you're not living in each other's pockets. The novelty value is still there.
I think so.
You're seeing each other all the time. It's like domestic drudgery kicks in. When you see someone all the time, that's It's not that exciting, is it?
Well, exactly. I've seen him twice, I think, possibly 3 times since February now. The last gig we had with the Antipoet was Valentine's, and then of course in comes lockdown and all of our summer festivals went, all of our gigs disappeared until August, and then we did a one-off in Berkhamsted, an outdoor thing, and we hadn't seen each other in all that time. Then we got together again and did some recording, and we're going to get together soon because I've written best part of the next album now, and so we need to get together.
You just picked up where you left off.
But it does. It just seems to gel straight away, and that's how you want it. You don't want to have to try and reinvent it every 5 minutes.
No, overcomplicated things.
Yeah.
You wear lots of different hats. You're artistic director and 1/3 of the Rants Collective, obviously helping to promote and disseminate independent poets, songwriters and storytellers. Available for comparing duties, events hosting and after dinner speaking if you're very, very brave. Is that because you literally do not know what you're going to get?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
That's all that's about.
But we want to talk primarily about the book because
Please.
that's the book. The protagonist is called Gordon. Now that's not a usual name for a hero. I'm curious. Tell me, it's called The Giant Step. Tell me a little bit about, because obviously it's all around the steampunk passion that you have. Tell me a little bit about it. Give us a little bit of a.
Well, you say the steampunk passion. I have got very much into the whole steampunk ethos lately, but
and explain what steampunk is as well.
Well, steampunk is different things to different people, really. It's a do-it-yourself kind of punk idea of very often Victorian or Edwardian kind of stylings, but with added anachronisms. If you see your general steampunk person, if you put in a thing on Google and say, show me steampunk, you'll just be shown a load of pictures of blokes and ladies with ridiculous top hats with all different things on. And if you went to go out and buy a steampunk hat like that, you couldn't. Those are made. The people make them themselves. It's all about individuality and trying to show your individuality through this idea of mixing styles and ideas. I loved all that. Absolutely loved that. My book is set in 1895 in Victoriana, but it's got a rocket in it. A rocket that goes to the moon. He's
sent to the moon, isn't he? And he gets to the moon and he's like, this is what I was expecting.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, don't give it all away.
No, I won't. That's why I left it there.
But yeah, that's the whole thing. It's nothing new in that. People have been doing that for years. Jules Verne did that sort of stuff donkeys years ago. So what's the point of doing it again? Because this is done differently. This is done my way, and it's a pulling in of other stuff, pulling in of things that have been done, pulling them out again in a different way, putting my own stamp on it. So this is not just a retread of other people's things. This is just my version of it, which is what I see steampunk as being. I hadn't come across it until a little while ago, but the Antipoet often get called a steampunk poetry act, and I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea, just because we dress a bit.
Explain to the listeners and the viewers how you guys dress, particularly Ian.
I don't actually remember how it started. We had this thing about the silhouette with the double bass, and me with the straight microphone with the sort of 50s looking mic head on it. That was planned and designed to show the act. But where the costumes came from, I don't know. I don't know when we started adding that in. It seemed to be quite organic from the beginning, but it was a lot of frock coats and velvet and brocade and PVC, stack heels and hats.
Yes, that's the title of one of your books.
Quaking in my stack heels, yeah. So I think it just happened. I think we just tried to outdress each other from gig to gig. And,
really, I'm not surprised by that.
And what we created completely separately from the steampunk crowd was something that looked a bit steampunky. And so people said, "Oh, you're a steampunk act." No, we're not. I don't even know what that is. And then I decided I better look into it. And I thought, actually, we pretty much are. And and then looked further into the steampunk community, and I thought, actually, I like this. It went with everything that I grew up with. I grew up in the 70s with punk rock, and the whole idea of making it up as you went along, and not necessarily being able to play your instrument, and not going and buying things off the peg, but building your own look. And that's what was going on here. But there was also that added little bit of mixing it with something classical. And I thought, this is great. And so I started looking into that idea. And I realized people were publishing books and people were making records and stuff in this vein. And so I started looking at that stuff and listening to it and thinking, this is what we do. And this is the sort of thing I like to read. So why shouldn't I have a go at writing it? And I hadn't written that sort of thing before. I wrote a novel years ago, which you haven't got on that pile. It was called Down Among the Ordinaries. It was my first published book. And it was a story about writing about what I knew, which was about a musician down on his luck. I did a poetry book. I did the book about the Edinburgh Festival and various other things. And I'd never written the sort of thing that I liked to write. That I liked to read. That's where I was going with that. I hadn't written the sort of things that I liked to read. And so I had a bit of time on my hands, and I started writing what eventually became The Giant Step, which is the new book, volume 1 of the Periwinkle perspective, which is going to be a very long-running series, I hope.
It's really exciting. So, talking about this, would you be happy to read us a little excerpt from the book?
I can, yes.
A little taste, a little sneak preview for the listeners, please.
Yes, the book doesn't actually come out until the 26th of November. So we're recording this now at the beginning of October. Just a little bit of history to what I'm going to read here then, is I had been writing short stories for a short story show that I did every month in Richmond and in Croxley Green, and in little tea shops. And every month I was doing 2 new short stories, and I would have a guest coming along and doing a couple of short stories. So every month I had in my head I've got to churn out at least 20 minutes worth of short stories for this show. And I got into that pattern, and I did 6.5 years of that show and wrote God knows how many short stories. And when the cafes closed and I didn't have the gig anymore, I was still stuck in that I've got to do. And that was happening at the same time as I was reading steampunk stuff and thinking I want to do something in this vein. So I wrote a short story that was a steampunk short story and loved it so much, and I thought I'm going to do a sequel. So I did another one, and they became the prologue and the first chapter of what is now The Giant Step, because I just kept going, kept on doing it, and thoroughly enjoyed it. By the time I was chapter in, I knew where the whole thing was going to go, and I had it planned as a book then rather than a series of short stories.
Is your day as a writer, is it quite structured? Do you wake up in the morning and think, right, 9 o'clock, sitting at my desk, and you write till 5, or is it just as and when the mood takes you and you're inspired?
The mood is always there, and I'm always inspired, so it's all day, every day.
So you're really disciplined then?
I would say it's disciplined. I wake up in the morning and I'm writing before I've even got
amazing.
Up, and then I'm very often writing until I nod off, and then in the day. But it's not say, right, I'm going to do 2 hours here.
Donna's nodding there like the Churchill dog, going, oh my God, this never stops. Do you have a notepad by the bed?
No, I write everything on a Nokia 6500 Classic.
I actually thought you were joking when that was in the forward, but it's sadly not a joke, is it?
All these books have been done on that. I say on that same Nokia 6500, it's a bit of a trigger's broom, because it gradually falls apart on me. I think we're on something like the 5th keyboard on it.
Okay.
One day I worked out that you didn't have to superglue the numbers back on when they fall off. You could actually slide the keyboard out and slide a new one in, because it was really difficult.
Or you could just actually buy,
No, I can't work things out.
An iPhone. I know, this newfangled stuff.
No. The kids bought me one of those, and I did I think 6 weeks on that, didn't I? 6 weeks learning to do that. And they had stripped it so that it wouldn't do anything other than let me write and then email it to Donna. And I know I was getting there. I was slow because it had to have a keyboard on it that I could work. I can't work these
the QWERTY keyboard.
Nonsense business. I can't do that. I have trouble.
A QWERTY keyboard. Who thought of that stupid idea?
it had to have been a dyslexic actually.
Yeah.
Who had no idea which order the alphabet went in. But I needed the one that was on the old telephones where you could press it so many times.
God.
It works in my head and I can do it without looking, and it's fast and easy.
Phones.
But that's it, isn't it? You do the way that is
Works
easy for you.
absolutely, yeah.
So I write on that little thing, and I do it as a series of texts. And then I text
I can't
it.
believe you actually do this as a form of text.
Yeah, and I text it to Donna, and Donna turns it into an email, and magically all the spelling mistakes are altered, and then we print it out onto pieces of paper, and I can read it, and then we can do it from there. You know, you work the way that things work for you. And as I say, I didn't go to college or university. I didn't even finish school. I don't have, well, the only qualification I've got is cycling proficiency, and I blagged that. So I don't have the pieces of paper to say you can do this.
That
I've
doesn't
worked
matter.
it out on the fly.
The more creatives I speak to, the more you realise that actually that's not important. I mean, I've got one O level. Everyone thinks I'm very clever, but I'm actually not. I think it's with you. You know, you're passionate. You read a lot. You know, you talk to people like you. You're inspired by being around other creatives, and you know, you just kind of blag it, really, don't you?
I did do English O level.
Yeah, I did too. That's the only O level I got.
I didn't get it.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to know why I didn't get it? I don't think I've told this in an interview before. I was sitting there like this. Now my page was turned over, ready to start the exam in the school hall, sitting there ready, and the door suddenly flew open at the far end of the hall, and in came my English teacher, in a bit of a fluster and a flap, and he had all these little slips of paper in his hand, and he walked along all the tables and he put them down, face down on the table, and then he smiled and he walked out. And then when the invigilator said, "You can turn over your papers now," we all turned over this little slip, and it said, "Dear class, really sorry about this, but we've been studying the wrong books for the last 3 years. Good luck."
Oh my God.
And that was it. And we sat there and I thought, well, you know, I've probably now got as good a chance as anybody in the class of passing because I hadn't read the books anyway.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So, but no, completely failed, and that was the only exam I took. So never seen him since.
Well,
still on the run.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, that was
That's
was
a great
me
story.
With,
so let's have a quick excerpt.
oh yeah,
from
you
the
want
book.
an excerpt?
Yes, please.
An excerpt. Now I've turned them over. I've got them in the wrong order, haven't I? Right. Okay. Then this will be. This is actually, that's why I was telling you about where it came from. This is the short story that it started from. So the short story, the original short story became the prologue. It was slightly rewritten for the prologue as I went along because I'd had other ideas, but this is the part of the original short story. This is Periwinkle Perspective, Volume 1, The Giant Step, Prologue. The morn is not made of cheese. The Times, 24th of June, 1897. Neither, as we now know, is it lit from within by some infernal extraterrestrial engine, nor populated by a race of green-skinned, dust-devouring devils hell-bent on the extermination of the human race, as had been predicted by several prominent members of Lord Salisbury's cabinet before the Victoria's celebrated launch from St James's Park on Tuesday evening. These and various other populist presumptions were finally dispelled earlier today by Her Majesty's faithful servant, Space Captain Gordon Periwinkle, who proudly conquered that final of all frontiers for Queen and Empire, thus heralding a bold new era of scientific understanding and technological advancement for the benefit of all mankind. It may seem obvious to us now, living as we do in such enlightened times, but lest we forget it is not so very long since our ancestors ceased revering this enigmatic nocturnal orb as a god in itself, something to be feared and exalted in equal measure, not discounting acts of ritual human sacrifice. How quickly the times are changing. There are those, of course, the ubiquitous Luddites and the naysayers of our times who would seek to reject Her Majesty's acquisition of the Earth's solitary natural satellite as an outpost for her ever-expanding empire, going so far as to decry her ambition as profligate and ungodly. To Her Majesty, however, the moon's appropriation represents the very jewel in her crown, prized beyond even the Kohinoor diamond, possessing as it does peculiar strategic value and thus ensuring her position as esteemed empress of all the earth for years to come. Speaking at an ambassadorial dinner at Buckingham Palace yesterday, having just been shown the photograph, reprinted on our cover for your delectation, Her Majesty proffered these words on the subject. On the surface, she may be bleaker than the fantastical imaginings of a penny chapbook artist, hairless, featureless, and sterile, and yielding none of the strange minerals nor vacuum-resistant vegetation that we had expected of her. Yet, next to the taming of fire and the invention of the wheel, ascendancy over our closest celestial neighbour is, and ever shall be, seen as the single most important venture in the history of our species. That do you for a start?
Yes.
Buy the book. Available 26th of November from caffeinightsbooks.com or other places on the internet, but I'd rather you bought it from the publisher because I get a better cut. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Honestly, I'm just trying to hold it together and be professional. Can you just read that? That was brilliant. Your voices are fantastic. So just to recap, obviously it's available 26th of November.
26th of November, but I believe it's available for pre-order before that, am I right? Next week.
Next week.
And if you do the pre-order thing, you get the whole of that short story part that I've just read as a free download with me reading it with lots of effect and music and everything else. As the first 100 people that order online as a pre-order get that.
Fantastic.
So then you don't have to read that bit. You can just read it from the first chapter onwards.
And just to talk a little bit about what we've got on the table here, tell us about this kind of, I don't know what it is. It looks like it's from a museum.
Yeah, well, this is the hat you're pointing to.
The hat.
This is Gordon Periwinkle, the lead character's his favourite pith helmet. Gordon is an adventurer, or he was an adventurer before the Queen decided that he would be the person to send to the moon. And this hat has been through the wars, as you can see.
Can I pick it up? I'll try not to drop it. There we go.
Yes, he's got his tea caddy on the side there. He's got his gin on the other side there. His spectacles to hand at the back.
His handlebar moustache.
His moustache. And there's a Zulu spear going right through the hat.
Of course it's a Zulu spear. I would have expected nothing less. Is this hanging over from the Boer Wall?
Yes, he survived. He survived that particular encounter and decided to keep it there to show people how hard he is.
Oh, okay. This is awesome.
And this is a rocket that we had made by steampunk artist Chris Cracknell, who builds weaponry for films and all sorts of models and stuff for the steampunk community. And we had this rocket built. It's exactly as it is featured in the book. As you can see, if you're looking there, there's a gin still in here.
Of course there's a gin still
because
in
this
there.
rocket runs on gin.
I would have expected nothing less.
So he's made an absolutely fantastic job of that, and he's made various other props. And people say, why do you need props for a book? Well, we were talking about not being able to go out. All of the literary festivals have been cancelled, and these were made so that I could sit on a table at a literary festival and punt my book, and they would draw people into the table. Sadly, that's not going to happen this year, but next year, if this book sells well enough and volume 2 comes out around about the same time, maybe we'll be back at the literary fairs, and just maybe we'll be able to use the props that we've already paid for.
I do hope so. I do hope that we get back to some semblance of normality at some point. And I just wanted to sort of talk about Carole Matthews, because she's the whole reason we're here. This is how I got to know you guys. So you appear in her Summer Days and Sea Breeze.
I've done that trick, actually. I'm in 3 other books.
Yeah. And then Happiness for Beginners as well, and then the one that's just coming out. So
Christmas for Beginners.
Yes. So huge shout out to Carole Matthews, our lovely friend who writes the most gorgeous rom-com novels, and I'm still waiting to be featured in one of them. But anyway.
I'm in.
I know you are. I know.
The Happiness for Beginners, I wrote the poetry for one of the characters in there is a 15-year-old poet, and Carole doesn't do poetry. And she didn't feel she could get in the head of a 15-year-old boy to write his poetry, and asked if I would do his poems. And I did that, and that seemed to go down well enough that he's now, I think, 18 in Christmas for Beginners, and I've done his poetry in that, where he's got a slightly wider vocabulary, and he's a little bit more worldly wise than he was in the first one. And strangely, in Sunny Days and Sea Breezes, I actually get a decent cameo.
You do
as
get a
me.
decent cameo.
Well, as the Antipoet, really.
Yes.
Yeah. So I get to go in 3 of her books, which all are going to sell probably a lot more than mine will.
Well, she's on the Sunday Times bestseller list, but it's a different genre, to be fair.
Yes.
So it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, we could have probably talked all afternoon about pith helmets and steampunk and everything. It's been amazing, so entertaining. Wish you the best of luck with the book.
Thank you very much.
And just to recap, how can we find you on the social media channels, please?
How do we get me on social media?
PaulEccentric.com, isn't it?
Oh, it's all here. Written down, Simon,
So I
yes.
just did it for you.
It is. Paul Eccentric. Is it .com or .co.uk? There's a Twitter, which is that.
Twitter.
Yeah.
Oh, at Paul Eccentric. I'll do it for you then.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
So Twitter is at Paul Eccentric, and obviously it's caffeinenightsbooks.com, the antipoet.co.uk. Facebook is at the Antipoet. And if you want a fast response, you're probably better off emailing Donna at donnadanielsmoss@gmail.com. But this will obviously, we'll put this all up on YouTube and on the contact details when this is aired. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Paul Eccentric, for being such a great guest.
Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for listening to the Nancy Stevens Arts and Style Show. Passionate about all things arty and stylish, and catch us on all major platforms.